So, Derek, today we have a guest that I'm really excited about. I know you're really excited about too.
I'm super excited.
We've got a few of his books sitting right here.
Yes.
Although I did forget my favorite, and we'll talk about that later at home. But regardless, we had an author on a couple of months ago, which was really cool.
It was our first one.
It was our first one, Brian Asman.
Yeah.
And it made us think, like, why don't we have more authors on? Our show is about beer and horror, and a lot of novelists like beer.
Yeah.
Although, some don't, but regardless.
Yeah.
So today, we are super excited because we have Grady Hendrix, New York Times best-selling horror author, probably one of the best horror comedy novelists of our time. And for some reason, he made time for Beer Freaks.
Yeah.
I don't know why, but
It's pretty wild, man. When you told me he was coming on, I was like, yeah, come on, dude. And you're like, no, seriously. And you sent me, the email. I was like, what? Dude, no way.
It's real and it's happening. So you know what? Let's get straight to it because we only have a little bit of time.
Let's go.
Hi, I'm Stu,
And I'm Derek.
and this is our podcast about all the weird, spooky, creepy things that keep us up at night.
And the one thing that makes us forget all about them.
Ladies and gentlemen,
Beer freaks.
dun dun dun.
We're back.
We're back.
We're back. Grady, thank you so much for joining, man. Thank you so much.
Hey, y'all know, thanks for having me. I'm psyched to dive into a giant pool of domestic swill full of floating body parts.
You know what? That is And by the way, so I just want to jump straight into this point. So for any of our listeners, normally what we do is we find really great craft beers, local beers, regional beers. And when I emailed Grady, and I was just so excited that he emailed me back. Not only was he just very, clever and witty in who he was and how he responded, but he also had this great idea that I'm really excited for, because if you're watching this live, where it's not live, but if you're watching the video version of this podcast, what you'll see is we don't have craft beer in front of us today. We have some American favorites, right?
We have the OGs that started everything.
So Grady, can you tell us why we chose these beers today?
Yeah, well, craft beer's great. It's always exciting, but I got to tell you, my tastes were formed at college and high school, mostly college. And man, you're drinking whatever's cheap. And I found that that's where I still gravitate to this day. Cheap domestic. So, hey, is profanity allowed on the show?
100%. It's
Fuck
actually
yeah.
encouraged.
Yeah, it's not craft beer, it's crap beer. But it gets the job done.
It's amazing. So if you're not watching the video, in front of us, we have Miller High Life, Bud Light, Coors, and Coors Light. And Grady, I imagine you have probably some similar, but maybe a few different ones as well.
I've got 3 beers. I'm throwing some curveballs in there. I've got some choice commentary about some of your choices. I don't know. What should we start? I'd like, though, if it's okay with you guys, to start with, I think this is a 2022 bottle of Bud Light.
Ooh,
I
I
hear
love
2022 was a good
It's
year.
a good year for Bud Light. Yeah.
No, I can
2023
never
has been
twist
rough.
off lids.
Okay, well, let's jump straight into it. I like
do it.
your style, Grady. So we actually, just so you know, Grady, we actually got some little tasting glasses, which we thought were important.
Oh,
Make
nice.
sure that, we had just the true tasting experience. So here you go, Derek. For your little taster.
Aw, thank you, man.
I don't know that Bud Light's
With the
ever
bouquet,
been
rise.
Yeah,
Gosh.
you got to smell. You got to get the aroma.
Look at the head on that. That's beautiful.
You have to have the full tasting experience for a Bud Light.
Wow.
Now, 2022 probably not as good as 2018 for Bud Light, but I believe it's still a good year.
Smell of barley, some hops there.
Oh yeah. Oh, you know what? What you can smell? That's America. That's Main Street America.
That is America.
But mainstream America that's concerned with its waistline.
Indeed. Yeah, because we're not drinking the red can. We're drinking the blue can here.
No. And I'll tell you, I wanted to do Bud Light because for me, every bar smells like Bud Light. I grew up with 3 older sisters, and so we never had Coke in the house. We always had Diet Coke, and we always had Tab. So I've always had that taste for the more watery, light version of drinks. And I fell in love with Bud Light. There used to be my go-to bar in New York on St. Mark's Place. It was there since about 1978 or 79, called the Grassroots Tavern. Old man bar, all wood and creaky. And during happy hour, it was $2 draft Bud Light and $1 popcorn. And, $3 you were set.
You're set. You're good to go. Now we actually just got back from Flagstaff. We did a little tour there, and that's where I did my alma mater back in the college days. So Northern Arizona University, go Jacks. Now, when I went to school, we had a bar called the Museum Club. Now we had dime beers. So very similar, like they're all wood, all just it was a cowboy style bar. It's Arizona, right?
Yeah.
So you have a little bit of that cowboy thing going on, but dime beers. And what you got was a little 10-ounce plastic cup full of probably whatever shitty beer they were about to, go bad or something like that. So,
yeah.
But as a college kid, you don't care. And this is exactly, that's why, again, I think when you pitched this idea, I was like, this is brilliant. I don't know why we haven't done this before. We are going to taste test and enjoy some of our college favorites.
We got to cheers it up with Grady right here.
Yeah. Cheers,
Grady.
Buddy.
And now the problem is for me, I can't taste Bud Light because it's got so many associations and memories with it. I don't know what I'm tasting. To me, it tastes like bar beer. It tastes like Grassroots Tavern. But honestly, I have no idea. I couldn't give you tasting notes because it's so wrapped up with nostalgia for me.
Well, I think there's truth to that too, because I also think that literally Bud Light just tastes like the baseline beer. Like everything else is just based on Bud Light. So if you get a floral note from another beer, it's because you are comparing it to Bud Light in your head, or if you're getting a citrus note, it's because Bud Light doesn't have the citrus note. So to your point, you're exactly right. I think it's the baseline.
Yeah. It really is. And it's and there's something, I don't know, man. It's got this seal, the Anheuser-Busch logo. It's just it just says everything to me. I prefer the red and white label, but this still says quality to me.
Well, and you know what? We got our most patriotic holiday right around the corner. You put a Budweiser next to a Bud Light, it just looks like the American flag.
It does.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Speaking of patriotism, though, I wanted to just ask you a couple of questions about yourself. So you now live in New York City, but you're by way of South Carolina.
South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina.
Which comes through a ton in your books, right? I mean, a lot of them are based in the South, and they come through in your characters. So, I mean, honestly, I could pick any of your books, but one of the ones that sticks out the most to me in terms of the South coming through is A Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires.
Oh, sure.
So, for obviously without any spoilers or anything like that, although the book's been out for a while, people catch up, okay? But without too many spoilers, can you describe a little bit about how your Southern influence impacts some books like that one?
Well, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires could really be set anywhere because the real conceit is it's a book club and versus a vampire, right? Yeah. These ladies who have a book club, vampire moves in the neighborhood. But one of the reasons I wanted to do it is I feel like there's a thing in publishing, this real snobbery where people talk about book club books and book club ladies, and it's really snobby and dismissive. And it's sort of like these are lightweight books. These are lightweight readers. It's weird to me that an industry will slit its own throat like that because these are readers. These are book clubs will hoover up some books, man. And B, why be so dismissive to people who want to make reading a major part of their social life? I don't get it, but I was definitely a snob like that when I was a teenager and probably, in my 20s. And then I grew up and sort of like my mom's book club's been around, gosh, I think it's like 46 years now. Wow. So they've been a part of my life. I'm 50. So they've been a part of my life since I can remember. And these women, I used to be very dismissive towards them, but they really are, they've really been through the ringer together and they've really stuck together. And so I wanted to write a book about people who get dismissed. And I think making them Southern makes them even more dismissible, because immediately you're thinking of big old brassy blondes who are drinking a lot of Chardonnay and actually probably Pinot Grigio and, just kind of dumb and middle American. And that's not my experience with book club women at all, and especially my mom's book club. And so I wanted this vampire who's a cool, sexy guy to run up against the least cool people on earth and get his ass handed to him. And so that's sort of where that came from. And it's interesting. I'm one of the writers, well, not right this minute because there's a WGA strike, but I'm one of the writers on the TV show for it. That's being done by Danny McBride out of Charleston. He does Righteous Gemstones, a bunch of other stuff.
Yeah.
And we've updated it to make it take place contemporary, and because the book's set in the 90s. And it's really been fun to update it because, there's no one I'd rather hang out with than a bunch of Southern women. They've all got their gummy routines figured out, and they're vaping, and they're on the boat, and they got a cooler, and, in the back of their golf cart, and they're living large. They're living their best lives. So it's been really, really fun to work on this thing. And it's kind of a bummer. We got to put it on pause at the moment, but it's been a blast. And it's funny putting it together. We've realized how much there is. And so it's like we've been working on the pilot before the strike, and we're all so psyched. There are only 3 of us writing it, but we're so psyched to dive into like the other episodes, just like to really get into like what sort of the nicey touristy Charleston-y South looks like in 2023.
Yes. I love it. And I'm glad you brought that up, because that was going to be one of my questions. Is obviously they've already turned My Best Friend's Exorcism into a movie, which was an amazing movie. I enjoyed it.
Oh, thanks.
And so, there's got to be a lot more on the docket for you. I've read multiple rumors about stuff happening. Yeah. And so I can't wait to hear about what else you have going on.
So the short version is Horror Store is going to be a feature film, and the screenplay's done. Right before the strike, I was out in LA for about a week with the director, who hasn't been announced yet, just sort of fine tuning things. And, like I said, there's a monkey wrench and everything, but that is ready to rumble. And I think it's his next movie, fingers crossed. How to Sell a Haunted House. We've got a director attached. Sam Raimi's producing. I'm doing the screenplay again. And the draft went in. Yeah, I was really psyched. Well, it's funny. Do you guys remember this thing called Quibi?
Yes. Quibi. Yeah. It was
Quibi was that thing
where you could
just for a phone. It was meant for phones, right?
The super micro, like 5-minute movies, 10-minute movies. Yeah. I think like Jeffrey Katzenberger thought it was going to be the next big thing, and it really flamed out. But Sam Raimi had an anthology show on there called 50 States of Fear, and I had an episode in there. Whoa. And so I had done a Zoom call doing a table read with him and a bunch of people, and like the notes Sam Raimi gave were so freaking good. They're the best notes I've ever gotten from someone. And so I was so psyched. Like I really pushed hard to get him involved with How to Sell a Haunted House, because he's so good, man.
Well, honestly, like Sam Raimi seems perfect for your style. Because you do have, obviously your books, by the way, there are several scenes that still stick with me to this day. The parking lot, or the rest stop scene from Our Souls. There's some.
That was such a bummer to write
stuff. But so Paul Tremblay, another acclaimed horror author right now, called you the best horror comedy writer of our time. I don't know if you heard that.
That's very nice of Paul.
Yeah,
it's super nice of Paul. And considering how mean I am to him on a regular basis, I'm like, I'm very grateful.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, it was great. And so Horror Store, How to Sell a Haunted House, Southern Book Club is a series, and then Final Girl Support Group's also a series from HBO Max. And so the Danny McBride one's going to be an HBO for Southern Book Club, and then HBO Max, and that's got Charlize Theron producing, and then Barbara and Andy Machete, who did the Flash and the It movies, are directing the pilot, or doing the pilot, and they've got a writer attached, and they got a pilot script, and they were doing notes and going back and forth on that when the strike happened. So everything except We Sold Our Soul seems to be teed up somewhere, somehow.
Well, which is funny, because to be quite honest, I love all of your books, and I hope that this doesn't get taken the wrong way at all. We Sold Our Souls is my favorite. of all.
Oh, it's my favorite too, hands down.
It's incredible. And one of the things that I was wondering, obviously, it's all about a heavy metal band, and your references to heavy metal are deep cuts. I mean, we're talking deep tracks and stuff like that. So are you? Is that your genre? Like, are you a heavy metal listener?
No, and I was one of those jerks in high school and college who I thought heavy metal was for idiots. And when it came time to do the book, I was like, I want to write about a really dismissible band. And I had just seen that documentary Anvil, which is so good, about the Canadian metal band that sort of never quite made it. And that was really on my mind. And I was like, metal is the only genre of music that's just not cool. You say I'm into dank gangster rap, at least you've got some street cred. You say you're into metal, and people assume you live in your mom's basement and watch a lot of porn. And
it's true.
It's so
and
true.
so I started listening to metal to sort of get into it. And I took me a while to find my way in, which turned out to be Black Sabbath by Black Sabbath on their album Black Sabbath, going right back to the first band, the first album, the first big track. Should have started there. And then, man, the sky was the limit. And I'm there's so many metal bands I listen to now. Yeah. That my life would be poor without them. I mean, it's the idea that I got through this much of my life without listening to Metallica or Slayer or, I listened to Sleep Dope Smoker relentlessly writing that book, Devin Townsend Project, so much stuff, Mastodon's Leviathan album, Wolves in the Throne Room, Woods of Eeps. I mean, it's just so much stuff. And two things really saved me. One was that metalheads are the nicest people on earth. And so you'd be at a club or a bar or a show and you'd say to someone, oh, what should I be listening to? And boom, I have so many cocktail napkins and coasters and scraps of paper with bands and albums written on it. Metalheads are the most welcoming people I've ever met in any fandom.
It's so true. It's so
yeah.
And I will tell you, I was probably into alt rock for most of my life. I grew up in San Diego. There's the whole thing. But my wife was super into metal, and I was like, that's weird. I didn't,
Oh, that's awesome.
And so she got me into metal, and I was like, and one of the first shows we went to, and you could argue it's more pop metal, but Rob Zombie, we went to go see him in Las Vegas. And I was a little nervous, I'm a 25-year-old dude, and I'm like, what are they going to beat me up, because I'm not wearing all black or something? They are the nicest people in the world. It's just a phenomenal group of people.
And it's funny. I know some folks who've worked with Rob Zombie before, and they're like, say what you will about his movies. He is the sweetest dude you will ever meet in your life.
Yep. Yep.
So, but yeah, and then the other thing that really saved me is my next door neighbor growing up is married to a guy named Tom Youngblood, who is the lead guitarist and sort of the guy who runs a melodic metal band called Camelot with the K. Oh. And they're sort of they never charted or anything, but they're a really working class, hardcore touring band. That's what they do. They tour South America, they do Asia, they do Europe, and that's their bread and butter. They don't have day jobs. And he was super nice in terms of giving me time and access and letting me come see shows and come backstage, which was really great. And it's funny, COVID really messed him up. It really hurt his arm. And he's back on the road again, but it was a long recovery process. But
no doubt.
So I had some insiders, and then I had fans, and they just really steered me through. And I don't know, man. I love that book. That's my favorite of my books, to be honest.
So, I mean, and again, all of your books are just incredible. I laugh. I get, scared. Sometimes I have to turn all the lights on, when I go to the bathroom at night because I'm thinking of, Grady Hendrix book. But also, I mean, some of your thoughts in the books are profound. I'm going to butcher this line from We Sold Our Souls, but it was something, I think it was something like basically a song is not a bullet. It is like a breaker of chains or something like that. And it was something along those lines. And it was But because I think you really delved into the depths of these people who listen to this kind of heavy metal music and stuff like that, and it's not meant to be, you know, this violent thing. It's actually meant to feel freeing, which I was just like, God, it's like you've just figured out this thing. And so are those the experiences that you had that you just talked about? Are those the kinds of things that allowed you to dive into that psyche?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I wish I wrote faster, but I sort of like really go into my books deep, you know? And so when I'm writing them, I am a true believer. It's funny. I was listening to I don't know, this Swedish metal band called Zeal and Ardor. Oh man, they're great. But their whole, it's Black Guy is the songwriter and the singer and the lead guitarist. And his whole thing is they base their music, and it's some dank metal, but it is like they base it on slave spirituals. But the thing is, they're about Satan. And so they're like, you know, because he's like, what were you looking for? You're enslaved. Everyone despises you. Everyone's turned their back on you. The only person there offering you hope is Satan. And I've always loved that. I've always sort of felt like, you know, Satan's there for the little guys. And the songs are great, but it really got me thinking about the connection, because a lot of these metal guys, especially the early ones, come out of blues, you know, and that's so liberation music, you know what I mean? And it's like, and so there's a real line running from early spirituals and blues through rock and metal. Yep. It's the music that's there when everyone's turned their back on you. I feel like, you know, it's the one that, like, if you're in pain, if you're angry, if you're alone, that's where you hear your echoes, you know, that's when you feel like someone else feels like I do. And so that really pinged for me, you know, it really pulled a trigger.
Yeah, it's amazing. I love it. And I mean, it's really cool that you dive, and I assume that where you dive into these depths, because you just said you don't write fast and you like to dive deep into these things. That's got to come from your reporting background, right? Because obviously you've written for major publications, and so that's where
for a long time. Yeah, for a long time, I was a journalist in quotation marks. I did cultural coverage, so like celebrity profiles and reviews and things. But I love doing research. And one of the nice things about books is, like, it gives you an excuse just to call people and ask questions.
Yes.
And that's been so much fun. I did that a lot with We Sold Our Souls. I did that. I'm doing that a huge amount with the book I'm working on now, which is set in a home for unwed mothers in 1970. And like, it's a book where every character is pregnant, and I am a middle-aged man with no children. So I'm way out of my depth. And like, man, I am having some profound uterus conversations with a lot of women who've had kids and a lot of OBs and stuff. And it's been a blast. You know, and one of the things that's been really interesting, and I don't want to harp on this too much because I'm sort of like wrapping this book up, or at least the first draft, but there's this really wild strain historically in feminism from the 19th century and into the early 20th century of what was called satanic feminism, where a lot of these early suffragettes and things saw Satan as this liberation figure, as like, hey, everyone tells us to go to church and to worship God and to be good. And that means we have no rights and we're basically our husband's property and we can't vote. But then you got this guy who rebels against all that and like breaks the chains and gets thrown out of heaven for, like, you know, flipping God the bird. Yeah. And that's Satan. And you have in all these sort of feminist books, a lot of which have been forgotten, but this real use of Satan as like a superhero. And actually a lot of the early suffragettes, Susan B. Anthony and those guys, they helped write something called the Feminist Bible, which was a female-centered version of the Bible, like a translation. And Satan has a huge, really like heroic role in it. It's like these 1950s, the Feminist Bible, and like it was like, I think it's called the Feminist Bible. hold on, if I were a women's Bible, the Women's Bible, I think is what it's called. Yeah, Elizabeth Cady Stanton in 1885, and like it's like metal. It is basically these early suffragettes are like metalheads. They're like, "Hail Satan!"
Yeah. It's like counterculture, you know. Like you just you root for the little. If you're the little guy, you kind of root for the little guy, and that's kind of like what's going on.
And also, I got to say, satanic feminism sounds badass. Like
so badass.
And Grady, I got a question for you as far as kind of the process of how you work. You said you work slow, like as far as, you know, doing research and stuff like that. But give me kind of a look into when you think of an idea from conception to when, all right, the book is out. Like, what would you say, like, how long of a process is that? And what's like a day in the life of writing it?
I used to be able to do it in about 10 months, and now it takes me a year to a year and a half to write a book. Basically, it's usually an idea I've had for a long time. Like, Final Girl Support Group, I think the first draft was like 2014 or 15. Southern Book Club, I found a document with the opening paragraph of that book that I wound up not using, but like written from 2009. Like it's, you know, I sit with this stuff, like it just sort of like if it sticks around, I'm like, maybe there's a book there. Then I sort of start doing a lot of research, reading stuff in the field, like doing Southern Book Club. I was like reading a bunch of books like they were about quote unquote housewives. And I was really appalled by a lot of them because a lot of them are literary fiction and they take a really dim view. They're like, oh, housewife, so frustrated. Life sucks. I just want to die. And I'm like, this is not the experience of women I know who, you know, don't have a 9-to-5 job. Like, it's, I mean, it's part of it, but it's not all of it.
Right.
And usually what I hope happens is kind of the characters start to bubble up and I try to stick with them. And what happens is I'll write a draft that I'm like, I know what's going to happen. I know what's going to happen in this draft. And it's terrible. And I usually run out of steam about 2/3 of the way through and just sort of like drag my stinking corpse over the finish line, just to have it done. Because you can't fix something unless you've got it start to finish done.
Yeah.
And then I go back and I'm like, okay, let me figure this out. And I start outlining it and I usually give up on that. And then what'll usually happen is around a second draft, I'll stop and do huge character backgrounds, like big bios. Like for How to Sell a Haunted House, which is about a family, I wound up writing, I think it was like a 16,000 word year by year history of the family, starting from when the mom and dad met each other. Because I had to, families are all backstory. It's all inside jokes. It's, I mean, I'm sure it's happened to y'all where you're dating someone or you're involved with someone and you go to have dinner with their family for the first time and you like leave and you're like, that was nice. And they're like, are you kidding me? Did you hear what my mom said? And it all just goes over your head. You don't know the references. You don't know the backstory. So I had to get that backstory, even though it's not on the page. And so then it's just a matter of like, getting out of my own way, like trying to write, like I wind up taking out a lot of the cool stuff I thought I wanted in the book and just focusing on the characters and usually the one main character. And I've realized like I'm not a great stylist, but what I can do is kind of try to be my writing to be like a clear pane of glass between the reader and the story. Yeah. Like they're just looking right through me to the story. And that's what I want. Like some people are great. Like Stephen Graham Jones is a really great sentence by sentence writer, or Paul is he loves playing like really complicated and interesting structural games. Right. And for me, it's like, I just want to be invisible. I just want the story, you know?
It's so interesting because I think that's a really, really good point is when I read your books, I don't feel like there's a narrative structure happening around. Like I'm not conscious of.
Oh, good.
Like I'm not conscious of someone writing this book. I'm just in it, you know, and I just feel it. And then I think to your point, you know, it's interesting that you say that you wrote that backstory for the family in How to Sell a Haunted House. Happy to say I just finished the book last night. And one of the things that I found seems to be a consistent theme is you do a really good job of writing characters that you can hate for a little while, but then somehow end up liking.
Mark, yeah.
I didn't want to give anything away. I'm not going to say too much, but it's very interesting to see that. But I don't think you can do that without understanding a backstory or really having that depth of feeling for that character.
Well, and also I write a lot of women, so Mark was so much fun to write because I know those dudes, man. Big, messy, loud Southern guys who are just, they're so much fun to be around, but God, you don't want to live with them. You know, like... Okay, I'm opening up my second beer here, and I'm going to say, and I do not mean this to sound judgy, but two of the beers y'all have chosen brings back a nostalgia story. So you got 2 Coors products there.
I do.
And my first year in college, I went to college in the early 90s. So it was sort of like kind of coming to the end of the big first burning of AIDS. And I was in New York and I was working with the theater company. There was a lot of drag queens and trans people and queer performers.
Yep.
And they would not touch Coors products.
Really?
And the reason was Coors, the family behind it was really, really historically very conservative.
Sure.
And donated to a lot of focus on the family groups. But back in the day, there was a huge boycott of Coors, and it was this alliance between the Teamsters who were on strike against Coors and the gay community. So you could not find Coors in a gay bar anywhere. And it was this amazing alliance between Teamsters, who, you don't think of with gay rights ever, and gay rights activists. And so it was just beaten into me at an early age. You do not drink Coors.
and now Bud Light is embroiled in the whole thing
That
where
whole
they
deal.
had what's her name?
I know.
Yeah,
I
the
forget her name.
transgender.
But she was and then Kid Rock shot up a bunch of Bud. Like, way to go! I mean, you still bought a bunch of the
Kid
product,
Rock.
so I mean, good for you, buddy.
So my next beer is, I went to NYU and I was not in film school. I did religious history, but all my roommates were in film school and I knew a lot of audio engineering. So I was always recording sound on their movies, and all of them drank Heineken because of Blue Velvet, where Frank asked Kyle MacLachlan, "What kind of beer you drink?" He says, "Heineken? Fuck that shit. Pabst Blue Ribbon." And for some reason, all these film students didn't drink Pabst Blue Ribbon. They all went for Heineken, which, let me see if my memory's right.
I know exactly how that's going to taste. See, that's one
I hate Heineken.
It's got that skunky flavor.
Yeah.
Right? Like I can never get into Heineken because of that whole thing.
God.
It tastes perennially like the beer has gone bad.
Yeah, it really is terrible. It reminds me a little of Rolling Rock, which I wanted to find, but I couldn't, because Rolling Rock was what every bar had. Oh, Pabst Blue Ribbon!
Oh my God.
It's a man's beer.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Wait, so what was the exact quote from him again? I just want to make sure I've got this in case I need to say it later.
I think it was, what kind of beer you drink? Heineken? Fuck that shit. Pabst Blue Ribbon. That's a man's beer.
Derek, fuck that
Fuck
shit.
that
Pabst
shit.
Blue Ribbon.
Cheers.
Oh, yeah, cheers, Grady. Oh, amazing. Now PBR though.
So wait, how does Pabst Blue Ribbon taste?
Okay, so let's take a quick sip because I'm pretty sure it's going to taste very similar to Bud Light.
Honestly, I'm a bigger fan of PBR than I am of Bud Light. I think it's a little bit more.
It's got more gravity.
Yeah, it's just
Got some more gravity.
I can't.
I use that word just barely knowing what it means.
That sounds right.
But it feels right. It feels right.
It's heavier.
It sounds like the fancier version of heavier.
Yeah,
exactly. There you go. Yeah,
because it's not a light beer.
For me, the big one was Rolling Rock, because that was because everyone's in college, all your friends are in a band, and every venue always sold Rolling Rock. But that was also a skunky beer, like Heineken.
Yeah. Probably not as bad as Heineken, but very similar in terms of total flavor. But for me, I felt like Rolling Rock looked cooler, sounded
way cooler.
And I think I was trying to find a Rolling Rock 24 just to have consistency of look here, and I just couldn't find one.
I was trying to find a Mickey's hand grenade grenade, but I couldn't find it anywhere.
Good old Mickey's. Oh my gosh, so much.
Wait, what was Mickey's?
Remember
Wait a
Mickey's?
second, Grady. Wait a second. Can we introduce you to what a Mickey's is? Have you never had a Mickey's?
What is Mickey's? Yeah. Hold on.
They call it. What do they call it?
It's
the
a
grenade.
malt. It's a malt liquor,
Right.
They got the hand grenade version of it, which
version.
is just like a little 12 ounce, but it's like thicker than a normal can.
Oh, it's that little short, squat green
It's the
bottle.
green one. Yep.
I never had one of those.
It's awful.
dude,
It's
yeah.
awful. You didn't miss anything.
But
You
the
didn't miss
lid
anything.
always had like a fact, or it had something on the lid. Oh
Yeah,
man, it was great.
It had something.
Yeah.
We had it when I went to NYU in the early 90s. Our malt liquor of choice was Crazy Horse because a 40 of it cost $2.50.
Now, Grady, did you?
It was awful.
Did you ever do what's called an Edward 40 hands? Have you heard that term before? It's
Yes.
wildly dangerous because it's you have no control of your hands for however long it takes you to drink 240s.
Well, and also that was the early 90s was when porno chic was sort of starting. And so like everyone was watching porn ironically and living with film students. It was like, but Edward Penis Hands was the big one that came out. And man, that was funny for about 3.5 minutes,
Sure.
And then you're just sort of sitting there miserably watching porn in a room full of film students, which is just anti-life.
The awkwardness is just on an exponential curve. Just like, no.
Yeah, exactly. But it is weird to think that porn used to be a 60-minute movie. What?
Now that was cinema.
It wasn't a 3-minute clip.
I've tell a story.
I've got a grievance against the porn industry. There used to be cinema. There used to be, Majesty.
Yeah, I like the pizza guy that showed up, and then she didn't have money to pay for it.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
There was
Exactly.
Okay, Grady. So we gotta ask you kind of the fear
That's true. That's
that
true.
you have.
That's true.
Like a
Fears.
very
right.
deep fear of yours.
Which by the way, not that we're trying to, but there is a little extra pressure on you as a horror author to come up with a really good what's your existential fear?
Well, the problem is if you write horror, you kind of develop a capacity to be scared of anything. You know what I mean? Like you can convince yourself anything's scary if you think about it enough. But I will say 2 fears that have really stuck with me all my life. One is it's very boring, but the dark, it's terrible. I don't like it. I don't like walking around outside in the dark. I don't like it when the house is dark. I get sleep paralysis sometimes, and I don't like waking up alone in the dark and you're shouting at something and you can't. It's just awful. I hate it.
I'm right there with you, man. Me and you.
He gets
I get sleep paralysis really bad to where like my wife has had to wake me up because I've been screaming. And it
gets embarrassing,
sucks, dude. Like, so what do you do when you're by yourself? Because I got to have everything on, all lights on, TV on, sound on, just enough to where I can hear something.
Yeah. See, my hotel ritual is I come in and I put the locks on the door, and then I search the room. I do behind the curtains, under the bed, behind the shower. And once I've searched it, I'm like, nothing's going to materialize. I'm okay. And then I can do the dark. But I have had a couple of sleep paralysis incidents on the road, and I don't go back to bed after that. I just turn everything on and watch a movie. I'm like, I'm done. Because you get such a visual of someone being in that room with you. It's like after that, I'm cooked. I'm like, it sucks. I'm done.
Man,
I hate it.
So I'm kind of curious about this. It made me think. So all the books you've written, there's nothing about sleep paralysis. Is it that? Do you not want to even touch that? Like with your own kind
Well, but there's lots and lots of things in my book where someone is trapped in a tight space or unable to move. And that to me is the sleep paralysis thing.
What about in Horror Store where they don't know, I forget the main character's name, but she doesn't know where she's walking? Yes.
Yeah.
And she doesn't, but they can use the video camera to see where they're actually going. Is that kind of a manifestation of that?
Well, that's a little bit, but that's something I've had for that goes all the way back to the 90s where I was like, I developed this thing where I was like being lost, like thinking you're going left and you're really going right, and thinking you're going up when you're really going down would be so terrifying.
Yeah.
And that was really based on dropping acid a couple of times, or really once in high school, where it was just like not knowing where you were and where you were going it was like the most terrifying thing I ever did, because you can't rely on anything.
No.
You can't. It was awful. And so that being lost thing that they do in Horror Store comes right out of that. Like
that was,
because that was just
that stuck with me. Honestly, that part of it was just like, oh my gosh, what if you couldn't rely on your senses? That's wild. That's a wild thought.
Yeah, but we do that all the time. You get drunk, you get high, like you can't rely on your senses. It's recreational. The other thing I really don't like is stuff living under my skin. Bot flies, parasites. There were a bunch of videos going around recently of there's a parasite called a hair worm that's like a long black worm, and it would get inside praying mantises and things, and it hates water. And so people would pour water on a praying mantis, and this thing would come out its butt, whipping around furious. And it would be like 4 times as long as the mantis. And it was just horrible to watch.
I literally have goosebumps, dude. This is I don't
gnarly.
even, because that's stuff you can't even see by yourself.
I know.
Like,
now it's going to be your fault though that Derek stays up all night tonight. Just
now
so
I'm
you
going to
know.
have
That's
sleep
fine.
paralysis in the dark and then bugs.
With worms. Well, the other thing that was so horrible is like when you're little and you give the dog pills and you're like, what are the pills? And they're like, oh, it's worm Medicaid, heartworm. And you're like, what's a heartworm? And then you realize it's worms in their heart. And you're like, what? Is my dog just a big bag of worms shaped like a dog? Like, this is horrifying.
Oh my
Don't
God.
ever Google anything.
Yeah,
anymore.
that's exactly right.
Oh.
I mean, there are, like, as you're growing up, there are things that you don't understand. I still remember that stupid, scary, was it the scary stories that keep you up in the dark? Or
Oh, yeah.
Oh, the Alvin Schwartz illustrations. Yeah.
I mean, there were just some things in there, like, as you're growing up, you're like, do you remember the one where the girl wore the rings around her neck or something, or she wore a scarf around her neck? And
I remember that.
eventually, like, she always wore it, and this kid became friends with her, and eventually he was like, hey, take that scarf off, like, you don't have to wear the scarf all the time. And then she took it off and her like head fell off or something like that.
Whoa,
that was an gnarly.
That is such a famous ghost story too, like that always works.
It's classic, but it's classic for a reason, kind of thing.
Oh yeah.
There's too many scary things, dude. Life is scary.
Well, and for kids especially. So like when you're reading these stories growing up. Okay, well, so actually that leads me to another question that I have. I mean, were there any? Obviously, you have influences in your adult life, but were there any things that like you grew up with that scared, like that taught you to love horror? I know you love horror films, but horror books.
So growing up, I didn't read much horror because I thought it was way too creepy, to be honest. It kind of grossed me out. I read King and Barker young, but I think everyone does.
Of course.
The thing that really got me was in carpool in first, second, and third grades when Rhett Thurman drove, one of Michael Thurman's mom. She would tell ghost stories because it was a way of keeping a car full of kids quiet.
Sure.
And they were the classics. You know what I mean? Like, it was stuff that she'd gotten out of, like, ghost story books, the scarf around the neck, all that stuff.
Yeah.
And but every now and then there'd be a weird one she threw in or a self-referential one. Sometimes she'd change the names to be like names and locations we knew. Then there were ones that were our favorites that we'd ask for again. And like, sometimes she'd let one of us tell a ghost story and you realize how hard it was and like no one liked it. And so like, it really taught me at an early age that like telling a story could really hold people's attention.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And like, it could really keep people riveted. Yeah. And, the payoff had to be good. And just it was really kind of a fabulous thing. I don't think she knows what an impact she had, but I just saw her actually at my dad's funeral, and like it was and I think she has no idea. But I've talked to other people from carpool, and they just stuck with all of us. This idea that you could really hold people's attention by telling a story as long as the story was good enough.
That's amazing. And you're right. I mean, not only is it, scary stories or any good story can definitely hold your attention. That's why they've been passed down for millennia. Also, it's hard to tell a good story. And, so learning that lesson, I think, from a young age
Yeah, well, and also like just the basic principles, have the people listening have questions. Why does, oh no, we know what's going to, they buried the guy and stole his golden arm.
Yeah.
Shit, that's not going to go well. Oh my God, he's coming. He's asking for, he's on this floor. He's on the steps. He's, I mean, just those basic tension and asking questions and, foreshadowing. It was really good to get that kind of 3 years of getting that kind of once a week ingrained in you,
Amazing. Now, and I'm really sorry to hear about your father, by the way. I mean,
thanks.
Was that the funeral that you were at recently?
Yeah. It was, I still haven't processed it. What I realized was like, mostly I'm just tired. Like I'm just exhausted.
Yeah.
So yeah. Well, also even worse, I don't want to use any names, but, I found out, because my aunt died right before my dad, like a week before. And at her funeral, I learned that one of my cousins had one of his testicles bit off by a brown recluse spider.
Holy shit. That's not what I was expecting this story to go. That is not what I was
man,
expecting.
It's a good horror writer.
It's amazing.
Because it's like, it makes your tissue die.
Yeah,
and like, it basically killed his testicle, and his wife had to get a big old chunk of her stomach removed because she got bitten by a brown recluse and it went necrotic. It's like, good God.
Jesus Christ.
Dude.
Well,
Insects are disgusting. Well, spiders aren't insects, but
well, they're close enough. And spiders are my least favorite thing in the world, which is why being in Vegas is actually pretty.
They got those dead eyes.
Well, they in the weird 8 legs just moving the way. But there are very few spiders here. They can't survive the 115 degree.
They come inside a lot.
But I mean, but it's cool to hear where your sort of inspiration came from, I guess, at an early age. Now, my question, the reason I was asking about your father is, did your parents know that she was telling you these horror stories when you guys were kids?
Oh yeah, they were like, great. She keeps them shut up. No one fights when she drives carpool.
so she was brilliant. She had all figured out. That's awesome.
Well, and it's also like, I mean, they were. Ghost stories around the campfire. It's a tradition, like it's wholesome.
It is.
All right, Grady. So we're gonna get into the third and final beer, and I gotta ask you.
Okay.
I'm really big into. I love character development. I love to act. I love to do all that stuff. So that's like a big thing for me. And I saw and read that you do like one-man shows instead of like normal book kind of signings. And so that, I was like, dude, I got to ask him about this. But I want to hear about it after we touch on this third beer.
Okay. So you guys, I think, are going for the Miller High Life next, which I'll be very curious because I'm not sure it's the champagne of beers. It's got such great packaging, and every time I open a Miller, I'm a little disappointed. I think it's a little too sweet, a little too frothy. But I had to go to what was available at my deli. And so I have a big history with Qingdao, which is like
look at you.
It's basically the Budweiser of China. And in college, your big meal when you're broke was the Chinese meal.
Of course.
And so and then you'd be like, oh, and Qingdao beer, and it's only like $4. This is like a fancy foreign beer. And then I lived in Hong Kong for a little while, and like Qingdao was Bud. And I got to say, I actually like it a lot. Let me see if memory serves.
Okay, yeah, let's see it. Now we need to get the review as well. Like, does it still hold up in the way that you hope it does?
And when was the last time you had that?
So I haven't had a Qingdao in probably 4 years. Okay. So it's been a while, but not too long. It goes in that skunky kind of Rolling Rock Heineken green bottle thing, but it stops just short of being unpleasant. It's a little more mellow, super stinky. I actually got to say, Qingdao, I would go Bud Light, Qingdao, leave out the Heineken and Rolling Rock.
Okay, there you go. So go with the baseline.
Yep.
Stick with the Qingdao.
So I gotta hear the tasty notes from the Miller High Life.
Oh yeah,
Fill me up, Derek.
Well, this is a big one, established 1903. Okay, Miller High Life champagne of beers.
Which, by the way, do you know that Miller High Life cannot be distributed in the EU because on its can and bottles it says champagne of beers, and they take that champagne very seriously.
Oh yeah,
so like literally
in champagne.
2,000 cans. Some guy ordered it for a private party in Germany. And they got crushed at the port in Belgium because they were like, you cannot have this beer in this country.
Well, I got to say, it's a classy beer, but I'm not sure. Let me know what you think.
But cheers again, Grady.
Cheers.
Well, I just got mostly foam.
Yeah.
It's a little funkier than the
don't
Bud
like it.
Light. It's a little funkier than the Bud Light. Like, again, the Bud Light, you go back to, that's like a very baseline. That is what a basic beer should be.
I think
what every
PBR.
beer-
I think PBR is my jam right now. That's it. That will.
Yeah,
Out of all of
I'm
this.
with you. Actually, I'd probably go PBR. I may even go, to be honest, and this has nothing to do with the cultural reference, Grady, that you mentioned earlier, because I fully support the LGBTQ community. But I grew up on Coors, like that was like my college.
Oh, sure.
I had no idea about the whole problematic, side of it.
Yeah.
But that was just like sort of a Coors, because I went to school in Arizona. It's kind of close to Colorado, and that whole.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, PBR. This High Life tastes like shit. To be honest.
Yeah, it does. There's no weight to it. There's no. I mean, the flavor's not even there. It's just kind of like.
I remember being a little sharp and acrid.
Yeah, it's a little acrid is a very good term.
Yeah, I don't.
And that's why you're the writer. And
I'm very happy with my Qingdao over here.
I think you've chosen why. In the words of Indiana Jones, you have chosen wisely. We have chosen poorly.
All right, Grady, one man show. We got to talk about it.
Yeah.
That
So
is just nuts.
when I did Horror Store, I was doing book tour. You read from the book, you do a Q&A, and it sucked. It was so boring. I was bored. The people there were bored. It was just awful. And after that, I was like, I'm never doing that again. Like, it was terrible. And so on my best friend's exorcism, I started experimenting with doing something a little extra. And I wasn't quite there yet. I was figuring out. But then when I did Paperbacks from Hell, I did a full-on show. It's a history of the horror paperback boom. It ran 60 minutes. It had 2 completely stupid songs in it. It had slides, and it
Did you
moves
sing
fast.
the songs? Did you sing the songs?
Oh, yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's
everything.
amazing. Do you have, are these on YouTube
I do 'em.
anywhere that we can find?
I hope not. I'd ask people not to put it up online because I really want it to be, A, I don't want anyone to be subjected to my singing, and B, I want it to be like an experience, like, hey, we're doing this in this place live, humans in a room. But it was also like, so now I do those with every book. So when I did We Sold Our Soul, the show was like the history of horror, heavy metal and horror. Yeah. When I did How to Sell a Haunted House, it's about the history of haunted houses. It always runs an hour. Haunted House doesn't have songs in it, but the other ones all do. Final Girls has songs in it. They all have slides. So I like run the slides during the show, and usually it's about 120 to 170 slides, and it's a 60-minute show, so it really moves fast. Yeah. And one of my touchstones for it is I'm a big 19th century history buff, and in the 19th century and even into the 20th century, public lectures were a thing. And you had people like Robert Benchley and stuff who would do comic public lectures. And you had people who would do, thousands of people would come out to hear a lecture on glaciers, and it would be entertaining and exciting. And the person giving it would be a showman. And I really love that format. Yeah. So I do this. And I've actually got one I did for a while that I'm trying to find a good venue for, again, to bring it back, called Summerland Lost, which is sort of a history of Kate and Maggie Fox, who were the 2 teenage girls who started the spiritualism craze in the 19th century, which is not connected to any book, but I love doing that show. And so it's just fun. Yeah. And it's really nice. It's different than performing a part in the sense that you're talking to people and sort of connecting with people live. And I really enjoy that. It's the closest you can get to like telling people a ghost story, to really, work on a thing where there's no plot, there's no story, it's nonfiction, but I'm going to have foreshadowing. I'm going to have setups and payoffs. I'm going to have you asking questions I'm going to have callbacks to stuff after you've forgotten about it. And it's I find them so much fun. It's usually my treat when I finish doing the book, like I turn in the book and then I start doing the reading and the research for the show and write the show. And that's usually kind of my reward to myself.
That's amazing. What you just said has given me an idea, and we can go in on this together, because I think we've got $1 million idea here. So it's like TED Talks.
Oh yeah.
but for like stories, right? And so we create a platform where people can go and pitch their books, talk about their books, all that kind of stuff. And it's more for entertainment than for saving the world. Although I do believe fiction saves the world in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Well, it's also people, especially Americans, we're always a little suspicious of entertainment. Like, where's the spinach? Like, where's the vitamins? And so people really love learning something, you know? So like when I did the Final Girl Support Group show, it's sort of a history of murder books, but it's also like, okay, why is there this character in Psycho and Silence of the Lambs and so many other books? It's like a scary trans killer. Like, where's that come from? And it was actually really fun to trace that back, not just to Ed Gein, but also to realize that Ed Gein was not a cross-dresser. That was something that was inserted in his story by a polygraph technician. And it comes out of this whole scare thing in the 40s about how criminals all were sissified by their mothers, like this really crazy, like sort of like hot topic thing, hot takes.
Wait. So then it even goes back again to this whole housewife thing, being the bearer of all the problems and having a terrible life. Yeah. Again, somehow it relates back.
Well, you know, it's amazing that even now people look at Ed Gein and they're like, oh, the short version of Ed Gein is that he was like a mama's boy who was obsessed with his mother and his mother punished him and, you know, all this stuff. None of that's true. Ed Gein says several times in his post-arrest interviews that the bane of his existence was his alcoholic, physically abusive father who like beat he and his brother relentlessly. Same with the Boston Strangler, who talks about his alcoholic, abusive father. But both of them have been tarred with this like, well, they had these mothers who were really overwhelming and wrecked their lives. And it's like, is mom just to blame for everything? Is that just like what we've decided as a culture? Like, it's mom's fault.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's like just the classic, whoever's in power gets to write what the history, you know, and that's what's happened. Yeah. And now finally, hopefully we're getting to a place where we can have an equality of voice where actually it's a lot of times the men's fault. The men did it.
Yeah. They're not so great.
Yeah.
So it's really, but like people really love hearing where this stuff comes from and sort of the history of it. And if you can make it fun and entertaining and throw in some stupid songs, like it's a blast. I love doing it.
Do you ever come to Vegas for any of these events?
I have not. And, you know, it's funny. I can't. So with How to Sell a Haunted House, I was doing book tour. And at this point, I'd done the shows enough and tours enough that like there's bookstores in a lot of states I work with that have a history with me. And most of them have realized at this point that the shows attract people and we've gotten too big for the store. So oftentimes they'll get an off-site venue, often a bar with a stage. And frankly, the more people drink, the better my singing gets. And so like, I really encourage that. But when we tried to go out west this year, like even bookstores that had worked with me, just no one was willing to go off site. And so for the next book that's coming out in 2024, the Unwed Mothers one, I'm determined to do the West Coast and like the Southwest because I haven't done it since 2016 or 2017, but I got to find bookstores that are willing to like, because now it's been years since I've been out there. So like, let's get a bar. Let's get let's get some beer in there. Let's not just do 30 chairs in the back of your store. Like
Derek and I can make that. We will make that happen in Vegas whenever you're ready.
That area very well.
That is our.
What's the big indie bookstore in Vegas?
So Copper Cat is probably one of the coolest in Vegas. It's actually out in Henderson, but you know, it's all connected.
Yeah.
It's a great local bookstore. But also, I mean, if you want to open it up to a bigger venue too, you know, there are plenty of small local bars, breweries that Derek and I are very good friends with that we can make it work.
I've done a few brewery shows and those are great.
Oh heck yeah, absolutely.
And we like sticking local.
You let us know. Yeah, we'll make that connection.
I'm in.
Happy to.
Also, I haven't been to Vegas in forever. It's such a weird city, man.
Such a weird city, and it only gets weirder every year, man. It's amazing. But I do know you have a draft due very soon, and we don't want to hold you back from that.
No, I appreciate it. I'm sorry to have to bail after an hour and change, but I got to get this thing written, man. I'm in the middle of a bathroom ghost.
Oh, well, you know what? If in a few weeks or months you can give us any inside information, I can't wait for your next book. We're Derek and I love your stuff. The only one that I haven't read is the nonfiction one that won the Bram Stoker Award, which I really need to get to, but I just love your fiction so much. That's all I've been stuck on for a while.
One day.
But so I just want to say before we go, Grady Hendrix, amazing, one of the best horror authors, horror comedy authors of our time. Books include Horror Store, My Best Friend's Exorcism, Paperbacks from Hell, which he won a Bram Stoker Award for, We Sold Our Souls, Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires, Final Girl Support Group, and most recently, How to Sell a Haunted House, which just came out this year, and it's amazing. Grady, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
Oh, dudes, thank you so much for having me, and take care.
Yep. Thanks.
And don't drink Miller High Life again.
Never.
Never.
Thanks
Thanks
man.
again, man.